Thank you, Brian, and apologies for losing my voice a bit here, but I'm thrilled to be back here, and I feel I'm supposed to give you the city perspective, but there are several perspectives that come back, even one now that's been rekindled of being on the Hill. I used to be Senator Moynihan's architect. He was the only senator who decided to have an architect on personal staff. So we had the office right over there in Russell. That's another story, very long, very interesting, but actually very important to, I think, what you're talking about, Austin. And this is for later, but Senator Moynihan taught me something about timelines. He taught me something about civic virtue, the notion of civic virtue, to do something which will not benefit you, but which will benefit generations down the line. And I believe he lived much of his life that way and served in public with that urge to help in the future, even though it cost him political capital now. I dedicated my book to him, and that story's in the book. But today I want to talk more about storm surge, and now from, again, several perspectives. The first one is the perspective of a floodee. My house got inundated in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and my ground floor is still devastated. I also can talk a little bit about the perspective of a regulator, of a city regulator. Under Mayor Bloomberg, I was his chief urban designer for several years, in the period up to Sandy and through Sandy. And there are some fascinating stories of what happens when your own office gets flooded out, because the Department of City Planning in Lower Manhattan was off limits during Sandy. How did we regroup? And then I have the perspective now of a professor. After Mayor Bloomberg left, I left also and joined Stevens Institute, where I'm a joint appointment between engineering and systems and enterprises. So in engineering, I get access to the Davidson Lab and the incredible hydrodynamic work of Alan Bloomberg. And on the systems and engineering, I work with Bill Rouse on the mechanisms of measuring and applying decision-making tools in complex and often chaotic systems, which to me is a perfect definition of a city. So now I have a new platform to work on, but I want to go through this city perspective and start with something that my old boss, Mayor Bloomberg, would always say: you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So the first question is to measure what's going on here. That's where the hydrodynamics come in through Alan's lab, where we have sensors throughout New York Harbor and can tell you at any given moment the velocity, the salinity, the height of the water that's going, what direction it's going. We also have a group in the complex systems working on a mathematical definition of resilience. It's very interesting. This is a paper that just came out in February by my colleague, Jose Marquez. Resilience can be quantified as a function of time and quality. Now, this is the graph they use to show the effect on the pre-state, the vulnerability, the recovery, but you'll notice the height of that recovery line, and this is where I have actually a problem with my colleagues, and I brought it to their attention. Under Senator Moynihan, what he taught me is that you have to recover better, right? That's the civic virtue part. We have to leave it better than we found it. So I see our goal is to meet these technical challenges, which are huge and multiple, but to get to a state where we also improve the quality of life and the quality of our systems. So time and quality are the variables, and that's what we'll quantify. Okay, now let's talk about managing. We have a problem in New York, right? We have the storm surge almost came with Hurricane Irene, and then the next year, Hurricane Sandy. 2 100-year, 300-year storms actually for Sandy in the space of a single year. We're coming up with a multi-scaled approach because we have to think of everything. So with a grant from HUD, there's the whole Resilience by Design initiative where we're looking at regional scale issues, things so big, even bigger than floodgates. Alan is working with the team to look at what if we could build a whole new set of offshore coastal islands. Now this is completely theoretical, who knows where it will go, but it shows that we're not stopping at any one level. We're not staying within the city bounds of what to think. Another one that I think is fascinating, keep your eyes on this in the future. This is a recent paper by Christina Archer out of the University of Delaware, who has examined the potential of wind farm drag to slow hurricane force winds. It sounds crazy, but working with Alan, we're going to see how the wind effects work with the hydrodynamics And hey, maybe just like we put cannon around New York Harbor in 1811 to keep the British from burning us in 1812, which, by the way, that's why they burned Washington, because they couldn't get to New York. Can we array some of these things strategically? I don't know, but it's a fascinating topic to look at. Now, at the neighborhood scale, one level down, and this is where our sensors in the harbor come in, because we're trying to model how the hydrodynamic forces will actually meet the topography of the land, and we've done this for Hoboken, where you can see, and now I'm working in some architectural 3D visualizations of this process and how we can make people on the ground, homeowners, et cetera, stakeholders, we call them, but let them be there. We have the graphic capability to do this. We can let people see what it's like to live through a storm surge. And then we can also propose solutions. Seawalls we've talked about a lot. Japan is now building these things, the Great Wall of Japan that they're talking about. Some cases 30-foot tall concrete walls. Does it have to be that? Or if we do build some kind of offshore protection, can it be landscaped in a way that is actually a benefit to the public? And here I just use a picture of the old fort in Copenhagen, which has been turned into the most beautiful promenade you can imagine. And that's the water in the moat 25 feet below. The other aspect at the neighborhood scale is how to use land use and zoning. Hafen City, Hamburg has done an incredible job of rebuilding their docklands with a new set of buildings where the buildings themselves actually work as part of the flood protection. And there are tremendous engineering issues in this. My term for this is one of the courses we're developing, Bible study, buildings in bad locations. Right? So as an architect, I love that scale. That's my my specialty. But for instance, in Hafen City, they're using the basements of the buildings for parking, but during flood conditions, when the cars go out and the basements are supposed to fill with water, they're supposed to flood to act as ballast and a counter to the hydrostatic forces coming up from the groundwater surge that follows the surface surge. Okay. So speaking about how to get stakeholders to understand what it feels like to go through a storm. Well, I'm one of those people, and I defied the evacuation order that Mayor Bloomberg issued for Red Hook. And this is a picture of the water coming into my house the night that Sandy hit in October 2012. I went down, so I was wearing all my rubber boots and all these things, and I went down. So, and I knew enough to know this is dangerous, but I just wanted to understand what is the, it was you can't design for what you don't understand. So I wanted to see what this is like. And look, when I went down there, just as it was starting, and I opened the door, and it's autumn, so these beautiful golden leaves, it was almost poetic, kind of roll in. And then I thought, oh shit, the electrical. The electrical panels downstairs, boom, and then boom, the lights went out in the neighborhood, and it was an amazing experience, and it's not like Venice, but to feel the power of the water and to see it engulf your home puts this whole issue in a new perspective. So, I work on all these building level solutions, trying to come up with fun ways of maybe having movable panels that can be lifted, but they all run into regulatory issues. And that's what I'm finding right now from the city perspective as the biggest problem. Because if I were to take the regulatory path of least resistance to make my house flood-proof, to follow the zoning, building code, the National Flood Insurance Protection underwriting criteria, to make what I'm doing constructible, I'm supposed to, according to the federal regulations, which favor elevation, blow out the Victorian storefront of my row house, fill in my basement, pour a concrete slab, and make that parking. Okay, but in New York, as in many communities, buildings come together to form edges to public space. And the public space is what gives the communities their being. That's where people meet. That's where you build the fabric, the social cohesion of your community. So if I were to do this, and if the Good Fork restaurant down the street were to do this, and Fort Defiance Bar, and the pharmacy across the street, if everyone did this, we would have a street of parking garages. We would have all individually made our houses flood-proof, but we would have killed our neighborhood. That's not resilience. Resilience is solving the technical challenges, but making the quality of life better. So today, in all these panels, I just want you to keep that in mind. That's our challenge. Being back in Washington is fascinating. The Rockefeller Foundation gave me money to write this book, which came out in November, which sort of goes more fully into all of this if you're interested in it. It's called The Nature of Urban Design, a New York perspective on resilience. But being in Washington, I kind of feel it again. You know, what a different scale from going back to my house and seeing my flooded ground floor. I know the power of Washington when people come together to make rational decisions. And I know how difficult that is in this era. And, you know, I guess I got to live through another era, and, you know, as things were changing perhaps. But I just have to call on all of you in all your dealings with people on both sides of the aisle. The stakes are so high now. There is a need to be able to think about this rationally and purposefully. And I hope perhaps maybe this is the issue that gets us working together again. So anyway, thank you all very, very much. I appreciate the time.